Okay, Chevra, here we are holding Daf Chav Zayin today officially, and we're picking up really on Chav Vav on the base on the bottom, 2 dots, 5 lines from the bottom.
Oh, I just looked up the halacha. There is a minute that was the couch on both yard sides, which supports the notion that the yard side at both times.
Right. Yeah.
So there's 3 different minhagim.
Meaning one first, one on the second, and
And many communities do. I did both.
Yeah.
That guy claimed that the other Aleph for Ashkenazim based on the Mishnah Berurah, other Beis for Sephardim.
I know, I saw it.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, there's a minute for both.
Some people do both. Yeah. Well, I guess they say why not?
But the main one was that one.
A minute for what?
To say kaddish on both days yard side.
If
your
the
father
person
said,
has
hey,
to
I
lay
got
Adar, which Adar do you do the yard side?
Oh. Yeah. In general, the other Aleph, other base question comes up most of the times when it relates to things like passage of time, right? Like Purim's the big one.
So for Purim, we always say the second, except for
That's
minor.
Okay.
We say the second.
Ein Mavrin. So just very quick. I mean, nothing very complicated, but one of the requirements for an Avel, it's learned out. We'll see on Chaf Zayin Amud Beis, is learned out from Yecheskel that when Yecheskel was giving over his nevuah, or when Hashem told him about his nevuah, he was told that his wife's going to die. You're not going to have any time to be an Avel over her because the Korban's coming anyways. So therefore, don't do all of the following things. And we learned from there by inference what the normal things of Avelus are, meaning we learn a considerable amount. And I find that to be very philosophically comforting, ironically, about Hilchos Avelus, which is that where are the primary halachos of Avelus learned? I don't know, I haven't seen anyone say this, but to me this is a very obvious observation. The 2 places where we learn a lot of the halachos of Avelus are from the halachos of what we tell Bnei Aharon, and from what Yecheskel is told. And in both scenarios, we learn it through inference. We don't learn it through and do this. It's don't do the following things, and we take it from there. This is what you're supposed to do. Which means even when Hashem is telling us to be Noeg Dini Avelus, it's being done in somewhat of an indirect manner. So as if to say, this isn't something we really want. Meaning death is not something that came to the world through an ideal. Really, death that never should have come to the world. So really, the places where we learn the Nihuge Avelus are, whether it's from the fact that Aharon's sons, we were talking about the Chanukas HaMishkan, so therefore it wasn't the proper time to be Avelus, or it's by Yecheskel because your enemy's not going to have time. I know, I find that to be interesting. But either one of the Nihuge Avelus, which we are knowing nowadays, is the Sudas Havara, Sudas Havra, however you pronounce it. This is basically also learned out from Yecheskel. What Yecheskel is told to not to eat from the food of others. Right? That's how the pasuk finishes. So we learn from there that implies that a normal Avel is not supposed to eat from his own food, but rather he's supposed to eat from the other ones. And I mentioned yesterday that there's a machlokus in the Rishonim about whether that applies to every Suda of the first day of Avelus, or whether it only applies to the first Suda, which is the way we're Noeg, which means the first Suda an Avel is usher to be preparing on his own. I'll just say it out loud. It goes without saying that if a person doesn't have anyone to help him prepare Suda, he's not supposed to fast. He's supposed to eat, and if it means he's got to make his own food, he's got to make his own food. I'm just going to quote from you what the Rush quotes from Yerushalmi, to me a language that is very fiery, but I think very, very important. He says that if chas v'shalom a person is in such a situation where he's forced to make his own Suda, he says, Tavoi me'era l'shchenim, a klala, a curse should come upon neighbors, shehitzrichu la'avel, that because of them, the avel has become required le'echol mishaloi, to cook his own food, v'la'asos malacha, and do malacha.
Yep.
It's a meaning even for one day they couldn't just go and help the guy.
They couldn't help it. The Yerushalmi says this. The Rush quotes this, and on the Masechta, that chas v'shalom, a neighbor. What kind of neighbor would allow an Avel to have to cook his own food? You get out off your couch, whatever it is, whatever you think's important, take a minute, go to Waktov, pick up some food, do something, and bring it over to him. He says, "Tavoi," just the language is very sharp in Yerushalmi. Tavoi me'era l'sheinim, a curse. You should be cursed to those neighbors who aren't neighbors. To me, I find something I'm moved not just by the language of the Yerushalmi. I'm moved by the idea that what we feel is the emes, was what the Yerushalmi is saying is the emes, meaning however many thousands of years ago the not just the writing of the Yerushalmi, but just what the Masorah is. People say, oh yeah, who knows what it was like 2,000 years ago? Who knows how people act? No, that same feeling you have when Nebuch, you hear about someone and all the wives immediately on WhatsApp chats, all right, you'll take Tuesday, I'll take Wednesday, you'll take Thursday. Okay, we do lunch. We'll find out if anyone's allergic. That whole business, that's not a new thing. This is something we've been doing, Either way, I don't know. I find that to be a very either way. So either way, this is called the Sudas Havra. It said in the Mishnah. The Mishnah was sort of short. The Mishnah said. Let me just go back to the Mishnah. Yeah, the Mishnah on the bottom of Chavdal and Medbei said at the end. It said Ein Karin Choltzin Ve'Ein Mavrin Ela Lekrovav, and then it said Ve'Ein Mavrin Ela Al Mitas Kufa, and it wasn't really clear in the Mishnah what that meant. That you don't do the Sudas Havara unless it's on a Mita Kufa. So remember, there's also halacha called Kefiyas Mita, that they would overturn their beds. We don't do that nowadays, but where they would basically turn the bed over. So not only were these beds the beds that they slept on, these were sort of their couches also, right? So the idea basically would be that they would turn these sort of day beds on their backs and sort of sit in a more uncomfortable manner. We don't do exactly that. We have a different minhag, more sit low on the ground, but this is a minhag that we don't do nowadays. But when the aval would be sitting on this mita kfuya, so let's say the people would come and they'd be menachem aval, they'd bring him this suda. So what's the halacha? What are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to sit with him on a mita kfuya, or do we take the aval's mita and turn it to a mita skufa, and everyone sits on a mita skufa? So the argument is going to start with the brisa explaining that. Tana Rabbanan, ha'hoylech labeisa aval. The person is visiting an aval and he's bringing him the food. Im hayalibay gasbay. Here, there's two different mahalchim. If im hayalibay gasbay, so many Rishonim, Rashi as well, says it just means if they're very close, if they have a warm relationship and they know that they have a warm relationship with each other, then yavru al mitos kifuyos. Then the person who's visiting, because they're close, he can like almost shteltzu, he can be ima enochi b'tzara, he can almost act as an avel alongside the avel and sit with him on his overturned bed. However, v'im lav, and if they're not so close, then it's considered almost like not really a kavod, or we don't want to require the menachem avel to have to put himself in that type of an environment or situation. Then yavru al mitos kufos, and here there's a machlokes shown him whether it means even both of them, or is it just the person visiting and the aval sits on a mita kfuya. There is another mahalach in the Rishonim, which I think is very interesting, which is that libay gasbay is not referring to the relationship. It's referring to the avel, meaning in libay gasbay, meaning which really is more consistent with the language of libay gasbay, which is normally libay gasbay means a little bit gaiva. It means a little bit something's off internally. So if the person being menachem avel sees that the avel is libay gasbay, he's not acting appropriately as an avel, meaning he's maybe a little bit too much besimcha, he doesn't have the kovid rosh that is normally required. Then the halacha is yavru al mitos kfuyos. He should himself is with him and show him how to act as an avel by turning the bed over, as a way of sort of alerting him, this is a very serious moment here, you need to take this more seriously, the imlav, whereas if the avel is acting appropriately, so then there's no reason to do that. Yavru al mitos kufos, the avel sits on the mita kfuya and the person visiting sits on the overturned, on the regular turned upside bed. So he grabs a chair, sits on it normally, whereas he sits low. Now you'll see from the following story, depending upon which mahalach there you go, the story will be interpreted as two different things, right? Rava Isra Beimils. Rava became an avel. And Ol Legabe Abba Bar Marta. Abba Bar Marta. Marta was a woman. So Abba Bar Marta is referred to as the son of Marta. Dehu Abba Bar Minyoimi, which I find interesting. Sounds like Minyoimi and Marta. Wow. I think she wore the pants, it seems. He's referred to as Abba Bar Marta, and he's also Abba Bar Minyoimi. I'll shame the mother first, and then I'll shame the father, which I find interesting. I don't know what to say about it. I just think it's very interesting, yeah? But either way, he came to visit Rava. Now, he was a young person. He was visiting Rava. Rava was obviously Gadol Adar. Rava Zakif. So Rava, and the Pashtus, the way to read this is, Rava took, when he offered him a bed, he gave him a bed turned up, meaning regular, right? Meaning, which if you go with the first pshat, that it's about familiarity, Rava was basically saying, we're not that close. You sit on a regular bed. Abba Bar Marta, coffee, he turned it back over. He was implying we are close, meaning not that they were arguing, but it was almost like Rava was basically saying, listen, I'm the Gadol Adar. I have a lot of relationships. People might feel they're very close with me, but I don't necessarily feel that I'm close with every single person that I know because there's a million people that I know. But to you, it could be you feel very close with me. So Amar Kama Les Beidaita Lahaitzur V'Mirabanan. And Rava said, very sharp lashon over here. He said, how foolish is this young man, this young rabbi, that he couldn't understand that when I had turned it up and he turned it down, that he doesn't understand. If you go with the other mahalach, I think it's a little bit better. What he was basically saying was that Abba Bar Marta was coming to the house, and Rava, who was being Noeg, of course, the normal Dine Avelis, was feeling as Avelis the way he should, appropriately. And Abba Bar Marta, a young rabbi, maybe a little bit, either haughtily or on some level, assumed that Rava wasn't appropriately acting, right? And so therefore, what he did was he turned the bed to be the right side up, as if to say, Rava turned it up the right way because that's the appropriate thing to do when Rav is acting the right type of Avelus. And Abba Bar Marta said, no, you're not acting properly. And on that, it makes much more sense now. Rav is responding by saying, he's basically responding to an act by Abba Bar Marta, which was a little bit insulting to Rav. He was basically calling Rav out for not acting properly as an Avel, and Rav was saying, you fool, you don't understand. You know why? I mean, I'm Rav. I know exactly how one's supposed to act. There's a Chavas Yair. The Chavas Yair is in the back of Chavetz Chaim. It has a famous, the Chavetz Chaim in the Sefer Chavetz Chaim goes through many instances throughout all of Shas, Tanakh, and not Tanakh,
it seems
all of the different Lashonos where you find it seems like they're either speaking Lashon Hara or speaking cruelly to each other. And he tries to explain each one of them, Kifi, whatever. He doesn't say it on this Gemara, but he says it on other Gemaras like this. I think once when Rebbe, I think it's Gemara in Yevamis, Rebbe said something like that this person that doesn't have a brain in his head or something like that. He uses such a lashon, Mayach Bekad Kadai or something like that. So they say over there, the Chavas Yair says the pshat something to the effect that there's a halacha that says that if a Rebbe sees a Talmud who is because of his laziness or because he's not really working hard in his learning, he ends up forgetting things. It's a Rebbe's responsibility to give him a little embarrassment, not terribly so, but to be sharp with him in order to fire him up to really,
I do that.
You have to.
You can't hit kids now, but very mild embarrassment that they do respond to. Not enough.
Not enough where they're going to walk around afterwards and put you on a list and come get you 10 years. But
it's like more the competitive thing, like in a sport, because you did carelessly.
Yeah, I do it with my son sometimes when we're playing sports, and I'll say, "Oh, that was a nice throw. You want my stony sister to come out and throw it too?" Like a little bit rates him on, not to hurt his feelings, but just to let him know there's more as expected.
That's not angry.
Not angry, right? Exactly. Okay, either way, continues the Gemara. Turn it up. Let's say someone goes on a business trip, and when he leaves, he's not an Avel, but Nebuch, he becomes an Avel on the path. If he can reduce whatever possible while he's on his business trip, Yimayat, he should. The imlav, if not, Yogalgal Imad, and here the different Rishonim, we'll just read Rashi, Yogalgal Imad, and if he can't, for whatever reason, lower the amount of work that he needs to do for his business trip, Rashi says, Ve'ena oisas chayra bifnei atzmai. He should really try not to do it on his own. Ella im chaburi, he should try even then to do it along with other people. Meaning, don't go out as a blazing entrepreneur on your trip. Now that you're an Avel, you should try to still be amongst other people. If you have to be in the meeting, go to the meeting, whatever it is. Now, it's just interesting to point out, it's not obvious in the Gemara, but we already had a Gemara earlier, a Brisa. The Brisa said, I think it's on Chaf Daled, Umad Aleph. No, Chaf Hayim and Aleph. Forget where the Gemara was. The Gemara brought a Brisa. Excuse me. The Gemara brought a Brisa earlier already telling us that when someone's an Avel, if he's a rega for Shar Krovov, the halacha is he doesn't have to be Memayet Bas. It's only for a mother and a father that a person should try to minimize the amount of work. So clearly we're talking over here about a father and a mother. Tosos says that. Right? Tosos on the first thin white line says, Nir le Perusho, according to Rashi, the Hachamayri ba'av v'imam. We're only talking about a mother and a father. And it's because, and so then why are we being matir him to lower his, to even do work that he shouldn't really do? Because since he's already he's out in the way, he's already spent a lot of money on the trip. He spent money on the flights and this and that, the hotel rooms. So we're going to allow him to do the work. Yeah, Tanur Rabba.
Is this true for any Hefsid Meruba, regardless of whether
it's mashma like that? It's mashma like that it's because here's a unique Hefsid specifically that it's going to be mutter. Tanarabban, Bryce says, "Me'emasai koifines hamitas." Right? We mentioned earlier about turning over the beds. It's a minute we don't do nowadays. But this question of me'emasai koifines hamitas is not limited, according to 99.9% of the Farshim. There is a Karen Ira that says this is specifically limited to koifines hamitas. But here we're saying, when does Avela start? That's really the question of the Gemara. From at what point do we say, okay, go inside the house and turn the beds over? Now, why do they choose that specific form of Avelos to reflect the overall rule of Avela starting? So Tosfos over here says, because since being Koifes Amita is the most obvious thing one would do, it's like we saw earlier, it's literally the only one of the Nihuge Avelos where you look at it, and we saw that, wrapping your head with a turban can sometimes be done for other reasons. Tearing Kriya, maybe a person's angry, he might do it.
It's like we would say, when do you cover the mirrors? Because we cover the mirrors.
Nowadays, which really hard to find a good makar for why we do that. But I find whenever you don't have a makar for in the Gemara is when you have a plethora of achronim who try to say it. So there's like 12 different shatim as to why we do that. But either way, the Gemara is asking, at what point does Avela start? Rebbe Eliezer says once the body leaves the home, that's when it starts. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Mishiyista Magoilo, from when here this line is a very, very packed two words. Yista Magolo, Rashi understands it to mean when the aron of the body is sealed, when you close the aron with the body inside of it. And the implication is according to Rashi, it would come out that it really doesn't make a difference whether the aron is in the ground or not. It's once the aron is closed. Rashi doesn't say it here; he says it in other places. But it's a famous sheet of Rashi. Tosfos and many other Rishonim argue on Rashi, and they say no. Mishiyista Magolo means once the body is in the ground and either covered with all the dirt, or maybe some Rishonim hold that it even means only once you have some sort of a stone on top. It doesn't necessarily mean the matzeva that we're used to, but some type of a stone on top of it. Without getting too far into it, they ask kashas on Shitas Rashi from our Gemara, as we'll see in a minute, and then let's finish the Gemara and I'll tell you what the halach is. Maisa Shemeis Rebbe Gamliel, they take out a zaken here because it doesn't work out really that Rebbe Gamliel has zaken would have been alive at the same time that Rebbe Eliezer would have been alive. The story with Rebbe Eliezer and Rebbe Gamliel and Rebbe Yeshua, that's by going regular Rebbe Gamliel, not Rebbe Gamliel zaken. So here they take out zaken, right? So Maisa Shemeis Rebbe Gamliel, Kivan Sheyatz Mi Pesach Pesai. So Rebbe Gamliel he passed. Once the body was taken out of the home, Omer Lahem Rebbe Eliezer told his krovim, Kafu mitoseichen, start being noheg avelos. Why? Because according to Rebbe Eliezer, that's when avelos starts. The kivan shenistam agolo, and then once they did stimas agolo, which we don't know what that means just yet, but yeah, Omer Lahem Rebbe Yoshua Kafu mitoseichen. So the two different rabbanim came over and told the family to be noheg avelos at the two different times, according to them, when they held avelos started. Now they bring a kasha. Well, let's just finish the story. Amr like far kafino. They say, "What do you mean? We already did it from when Rebbe Eliezer told us to do it." Al pizakim, meaning because of what Rebbe Eliezer told us. So that's the story. So they bring a kasha on the shita of Rashi over here. Mishiyista Magolo being covering of the aron is because why would you say that? You see, there was an order to how it happens here. First, what happened was they left the home. Then, after they left the home, they did stimas agolo. According to Rashi, the stimas agolo could have and probably should have happened beforehand. You don't take the body out just holding the body. You put it in some sort of an aron. You cover it, and that should have been stimas agolo. So the stimas agolo should have happened first, and then they should have taken it out of that. So this is the kasha a lot of the Rishonim ask on Rashi. Other Rishonim say it's not a kasha. Maybe they went out in a mita, like on a beer where his body was exposed.
Or you could say closing the coffin is different from sealing the coffin.
Sealing the coffin, that's another discussion. Stimas agolo. Another thing, though, many of the Rishonim speak out over here. A lot of the Achronim speak out. They do this to answer a stira in the Rambam and a stira in Shulchan Aruch and the Beis Yosef in many places. It seems like there's a stira about how he paskins, and they say that really the lumdus behind this entire halacha is dependent upon what is the point at which we can say that from the Avil's perspective, there's a disconnect from the mace, meaning.
Because before that, he's an onain, and he has a different set of halachas. Once he's removed from it, he's an ovil.
Right. So the question is, at what point can we say? So maybe it's leaving the home. Maybe it's so. Really, they're all arguing in how to accomplish really the same thing, which is when do we say the physical body that is left from this neshama leaving is now no longer in this world? Is it when he's closed in a box? Is it when he's covered in dirt? Is it? Which is why you see that when it comes to when a burial happens in another city, then we say that we say that, what do you call it? The people who aren't traveling along, like when we go to Eretz Yisrael, the Avela starts for those people that are hanging out already by the plane. As soon as they turn around and go back to their city, that's when the Avela starts. Because again, from their perspective, that's the point when the mace is considered gone from the world.
So what's today's practice?
So today's practice is we treat the covering of the body or the aron, body in Eretz Yisrael, aron here in America, and I don't know other countries what they do, but we treat the covering of that body or the aron with dirt as the beginning of Avelis for those that are there. For those that are not there, I believe we start as soon as the body leaves.
And
I'm not
100%. That's when they tear. That's when they do Kriya?
Tearing Kriya, I think, even though Me'ikar Hadin, it's supposed to be done now, at that point, they wait till they get back to the home, the Shiva house, and they do it there. I believe. I could no. They do it at the cemetery after the burial, and the body has after people have started taking the shovel and covering the body.
I did it at the funeral home.
Really?
He told me.
No, so I've never seen that.
I've seen it at the funeral home. The practice must vary. Maybe it depends where the body is going. Was the body going to Israel or to America?
No, it was going to New Jersey.
Yeah. So I've also seen it at the funeral home. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
All right, continue. Shabbos. What happens? It's coming to Shabbos. The person's nayeg avelos, but he's not supposed to be nayeg avelos on Shabbos. And this is one of the examples of avelos before has here, which would be usher. So at what point did we allow him to turn the beds over? Right, because it's not an easy thing to go through the whole house and turn over all the beds. We didn't want to make him do it right before Shabbos. So we said mina mincha u'lamala. Tosos here is unsure if mina mincha means mincha katana or it means mincha gedola, meaning is it the 6.5 hour from the beginning of the day or is it 2.5 hours before the end of the day? Regardless, from that time and on, one changes over the bed. However, Amar Rabba Bar Huna, Afal Pikein, even though we say you can turn it over and make it normal from that in time, he still has to be knowing all of the normal dinim of Avelis all the way up until Shabbos. This is more just since a lot of hachanas need to happen Erev Shabbos, we gave him a little extra time to turn the beds over, but really he needs to be knowing the Avelis all the way up until Shabbos. What about Mitzvah Shabbos? Well, Mitzvah Shabbos, now here, Afal Pisha Ein Lo Leishev Ela Yom Echad, which means that let's say Shabbos is his 6th day and his 7th day is Sunday, right? So we'll explain this according to the Ritva. The Ritva explains that the Miktzas Hayom Kikula, which we've been learning up until now, only applies according to the Ritva. That's how we hold in the morning. And therefore, Motzei Shabbos, he has to be knowing the normal dinim of Avelis. We don't say Mitzvah Hayom Kikula and therefore 30 seconds after Shabbos is over, he's done with his Avelis. He has to be knowing the Avelis Motzei Shabbos, wakes up in the morning Sunday, and then basically we say go to Shachris in the house, and when you finish Shachris, pretty much as soon as everyone who is being Menachem Ava leaves, your Avelis is over. So Zakta Gemara, then on Motzei Shabbos, even though he only has to be knowing one more day, Choser V'Kofa, he has to take the mitos and turn them back over. Taner Rabbanan, Hakoifa Mitasa, a person who is doing Kviyas Amita, Lo Mitasa B'Lvad Ukoif. It's not only his bed, Ela Kol Mita Sheyesh Lebesech Beis Ukoif, all of the beds. V'Afilu Yesh Le'Aser Mitas B'Asar B'Koif, even if he has 10 beds in 10 separate places. It sounds like he has a lot of houses also, maybe. It sounds like no matter where your beds are, in any house that you own, I guess you got to get on a plane, fly all over the place.
You're not allowed to go anywhere. How are you going to do that?
Call the Shliach.
If you have a lot of houses, you have servants also.
Yeah, that's probably true. Right? Koifa is cool, you got to turn them all over. Afilu chamisha achin umeisach. Let's say 5 brothers, one of the brothers dies. The other 4 brothers who obviously live in different homes. Each one of them also are koifa, kulan koifa. And we don't say that it's only in the house where the misa happened. It's also in all of their houses. Third line from the wide lines. Let's say it was a special type of mita that you had in your house that people could have sat on it, but really it's not used for that. It's used for like storing clothing or vessels or whatever it is. Since it's not used for sitting and that's not used for lying down, so you can leave it and let it continue to be a dresser, basically.
Why don't we do that anymore with the beds? Why?
So the Rishonim speak on different reasons. I mean, the reason that sits well the most with me is that most people would see it as such a strange act, and most people don't know how to connect to the act itself as anything related to Avelis, and so therefore it would end up becoming a little bit of a joke. Decided to
joke, but this is how we did it. At what point did someone say it was strange? A lot of things we do is strange, right?
Practically speaking,
so why this?
Practically speaking, our beds can't be turned over. They have bedsteads. They would break. They're not like they used to have more like cots that could be turned over
or taken apart.
Yeah.
So at one point we went to a different type of furniture,
and they said
that's another reason I said, yeah. Could be,
right. You can't just.
it could be
change
at that point in time they said once the bed changes, you can't do it anyways the way we used to do it. So once we're changing it, why are we doing it? Really doesn't help anything. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean,
it seems like a very serious, it's over, and all of a sudden we don't do it.
I'm saving with Latifas Arosh. Latifas Arosh, we don't do it anymore. Anyway.
Yeah, you're right. The head cut. What's hard about covering your head? I think we could stop doing that.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't have good answers on that specifically.
That even more so. We can't blame it on, your head is the same. You don't want to
Maybe we
look like a Muslim?
No. Unlikely, but yeah. Either way, dargesh. What's a dargesh? A dargesh, we'll see in the Gemara in a moment exactly what type. It's different type of bed. So either way, a dargesh is ein sarich l'chfosa. Doesn't need to be. You don't need to do kfiyas amita. Ela zakfo. The Tanakama holds. You can just stand it on its regular way it is. Shimon ben Gamliel Omer no. He says dargesh materes karbitos. You have to loosen the loops of the bed. We'll see what that means in a second. But who nofil me'elav, and the mattress that it connects it falls on its own. So Gemara, and we'll come back to this in a minute. My dargish. What is a dargish? The Gemara, right? It would have been nice to say, okay, my dargish. What's a dargish? Yeah. Amar Ula Arsa Degada. It's sort of like an ornamental or a decorative bed. Yeah, it's basically like, fancy people. They'll have a bed in their house. It's like if you ever walked into someone's home and they'll have like a bench near their door. No one ever sits on the bench. The bench is designed to just, it's nice looking. They apparently had a minhag in their times that the reason why they would have this bed wasn't just simply for like aesthetic purposes. They actually held that there was some sort of a koach to it, that it was like almost like a siman for mazel tov. Like they would, in fact, I think certainly trying to bring that it was actually referred to as a mitas mazel tov or something like that.
Because Gada is mazel.
Yeah, that's where it comes from. But the question is like,
yeah, right.
What exactly is it? Like, was it?
Sounds like
for a mala.
Sounds like that's a frum.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rashi says lishros mazel tov aleha.
Yeah.
The Rashi.
Different malachim in the Rishonim here exactly what it is. Whether it's a problem of nichush or not, but either way. So that's Ula's opinion. And we're going to ding on Ula's opinion for a little bit of it. Amar le Rabba. Rabba said to Ula, or whoever was quoting Ula, Ela ma'ata, according to you, that it's just a regular bed that no one sits on. The problem is that according to this, it's going to come out that Gabe Melech, the Mishnah says, it's actually a Bryce, I think, but either way, Kol Ha'am is Subin Ala Aretz. It says that all of the nation, when they become, when they're being Menachem Ava for the king, that they sit on the ground. V'hu Mesav Al Hadargish, and he sits on a dargish. So Mi'ika Midi Da'ada Idna Loy Osvine, are you telling me that there's something that no one sits on? It's a purely decorative and ornamental idea of a bed. The Hashna Meisvinan, and now all of a sudden you're turning it into something that people sit on. It can't be that it's like what you said, Ula. It's got to be a different mahalach. Gemara says, Maskul or Rashi. Rashi says, what do you mean? What's the problem? My kusha. You're telling me all of a sudden it starts the bed we don't sit on, and now it's a bed we sit on? No different than food. Mida havia achila ushtia, the sudas havara. Right? Normally, right? The ada idna loy uchline v'loy ashkine. We don't just go around feeding people. Right? Hashta uchline v'ashkine. Now we start going around feeding him. So apparently it changes when he becomes a novel. So he says, Elamai, Ela e kasha hakasha. If you can have a problem with Ula's pshat, the following is a problem with Ula's pshat. Tanya the Bryce says, Dargesh ain't tzarich l'chvayis ela zakfa. The Bryce itself that we quoted said that a Dargesh does not need to be turned over like a normal mita, but rather ela zakfa, you just stand it up, no problem. It says over here, V'i arsa degada, and if it's talking about this ornamental bed, Amai eno tzarich l'chvoso. It's a bed. Hatanya the Bryce says, Akoifa mitasei. It doesn't make a difference. It's a mita, and if you have to be koifa mita, whether you sit on it or not, doesn't matter. He says, "Oh my kasha, what are you talking about? It's not a kasha. Mita dahavi amita ham yuchedes lekalim should be no different than a regular bed, which is like we said earlier. You don't have to be koifa if it's used for storage. The Tanya im ha'samita yuchedes lekalim v'tzarich l'chfosa. So what's the difference between whether you're using it for storage or whether you're using it for ornamental purposes? And again, you can hear the chakira here. The chakira would be, do we say that a bed that gets turned over is a bed you need to be sitting on? Or is it enough that it's not used? Does it have to actually be used for something else in order to take it out of the shame mita or not? So either way, he says, if you're going to tell me that a bed that's miyucha for kalim doesn't need to be turned over, then this bed that's not used for sitting also doesn't need to be turned over. So that's not a kasha. L-A-E, kasha, ha-kasha. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel from the Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, where he said, Dargesh matir karbitov, that you loosen the loops. V'hu nofel me'elav, and it falls on its own. And if you're going to tell me that the understanding of this bed is like what Ula said, then my karbitin is like, then what are you talking about, loops? According to Ula, it's a regular bed. It's just that it's made fancy. It's made nice. It's a regular bed, however they made their beds. This bed's like that. It's no different. He says, Ki Asa Ravan, Amar Leah, Humar Abanan. Ravan came from Eretz Yisrael. He said, I heard from Chashav Rav, Rav Tachlifa bar Ma'arava bar Marva Shmei. His name was Rav Tachlifa bar Marva, and he was obviously from Yerushalayim. To have a shchiach b'shuka de Gildoi. He was very, he was always hanging out in the shuk where all the leather makers were. And he said, my dargish, you want to know what a dargish is? I'll tell you, it's an arsa detzila. It's a leather bed, meaning the idea basically was that the regular normal mitos, you'd have the straps that would hold up, the ropes that would hold up the person or hold up the mattresses would be wrapped around the bed frame, right? But not through holes, right? Whereas this one was holed in such a way where the frame had holes in it or hooks or some type, where the mattress would be, or the ropes would be roped through those holes. So which means you needed to make a loop. So if it's a looped bed, then it makes sense to fit with the way we've been explaining it. Whereas if it's not a looped bed like Ula, then it's a problem. Right? He explains that a dargish, it's loops or it's connections. It's the way where the rope connects to the bed's frame itself is on the inside. Try to imagine like a military cot. That's how I'm thinking of it, where the interior is just a piece of flat material and there are rivets all around where you're connecting that sort of strip to the actual frame through some sort of a rope or something like that where it connects it. Whereas mita, a regular normal mita, is sirugo al gaba, that goes over the post itself, and therefore that distinction is going to be the difference between the two. Amar Reb Yaakov bar Acha, Amar Reb Yehoshua ben Levi, halacha Reb Shimon Gamliel. The halacha is like Reb Shimon Gamliel. It's machlokes v'sheinim about whether Reb Shimon Gamliel was coming to be machmir or coming to be mekel. The Pasha says he was coming to be mekel. What he was coming to say is that Tanakama holds that you have to stand it up. And he's saying you don't have to do that. All you got to do is just untie the loops and let the mattress fall on its own, and that's enough of the kfiyas hamita. Either way, itmar nami, Amar Reb Yaakov bar Acha, Amar Reb Yosi, Amar Reb Asi, mita shenakliteha yotzin. You have a bed where its posts are very tall. I saw the picture in the back, it made it look like a tent. Rashi understands it. So basically the idea is you can't turn it over. There's no practical way for it to even function as a bed. And it would basically be like the equivalent of our beds. Like if you turn our beds over, it just literally wouldn't work. So then Zokfa Vidayo, you just take the bed and push it up against the wall, and that would be enough. Either way, Yoshan al Gabi Kisei, al Gabi Udyaini Gedoilo, al Gabi Karka. If a person tried to be Yotze his mitzvah, Kfiyas Hamita, by going on a chair or sitting on some sort of a low bench or on some sort of or on the ground. Lo Yotze de Chavosai, and Rabbi Yochanan explains, Rabbi Yochanan Shlokim Kfiyas Hamita. Tanarabanan, Mechabdim, you can sweep beats and you could mop and spritz, whatever. You could do those things. It's not considered a stira to being an avelis to keep the house clean. You can clean the dishes, the kosos and sluchios, kitonios, various different dishes that you would want to clean. The base of not a problem. However, the ain mevian esa mugmer, you can't like light incense, the esa psamim, or like Febreze up the area. Lebesa avel. Why? Because that's already considered like a and what's a good English word for it? You're making it. That's already an extra thing. You really shouldn't be doing it in the house of another. Ask the more Eini v'hatoni bar kapora. You don't make the bracha on mugmer or on besamim in the beis ha'avel. Mashma bruchi hu dulim mevarchin. Looks like you only don't make the bracha, but it's mashma that you're allowed to have it. Ha'asuyim ma'asi, you're allowed to have it in the beis ha'avel. Loy kosher. Ha bebeis ha'avel. One is talking about where the avel is out by himself. He shouldn't be having any mugmer and incense, whatever it is. But when you have others there, and again, you have to remember the ovel, maybe doesn't smell so good. It's a little dirty there. It's the house is not going to be enjoyable for people to be menachem. We want to make it easy for people to come be menachem ovel. So therefore, you're allowed to put a little glade in the wall just to make it smell a little bit better. Fine. Zok the Mishnah. Ein me'elichin lebeis ovel loy betavlo v'loy be'askutlo v'loy beknoin. Right, the sudas havara should not be taken to the ovel in a fancy tray, various different types of fancy trays. Ella besalam, it should go in like a regular basket. We don't say the birchas avelim on chalamayid. It's too much of a public form of mourning. But you do stand in a line to be menachemim by the cemetery. Once he feels like he's been sufficiently consoled, he sort of tells him to go home. Because again, it's chalamayid, they should go home and do their sudos and do all of their different things that they should be doing. Ein menichin es amita b'rechayv. Now, in those times, the way they would do the Sudas Avara is they would actually they would do it in the they'd set up a bench or whatever it is out in the street, sort of a way of publicly mourning. He says, Ein menichin es amita b'rechayv on a chalamayid. You wouldn't do such a thing because that's already too much of a public form of avelus. Shaloi lahargil as a hesped. We don't want people doing too much hesped on chalamayid. Velo shel noshim la'olam. And for women, we never do it publicly. Why? Yipnei hakavod, even though, and the reason is because could be she's a nida, she's wearing white tachrichin, and maybe there'll be a stain, it'll be embarrassing for her, so therefore we don't even do it. So says the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan, the Rishona in the beginning, we're going to have a bunch of Gemaras like this. The Rishona, they did this, and then they changed. It's all going to be because of Busha. They would go in like, they would use golden and silver baskets for the Sudas Avara. And the poor people would get like branches of like an arava, which were like much lower quality. So therefore, they basically made everyone do the same bar mitzvah. You couldn't spend more than X amount, whatever it is. And that was because of the kavod of aniyim. Tanarab on another price. They would use like a very fancy white glass. They would use like this cheaper colored glass. And the aniyim would get embarrassed. Either way, they would expose the face of the ashirim, right? Now, why would they do that? Because since the poor people didn't have any food, they were malnourished. You could see the blackness in their face, and it was embarrassing for the aniyim. So what would they do? They would cover the face of the aniyim, and they would leave the ashirim open, which is a little bit difficult to understand. One is, at least with the other ones, I understood that no one's going to look at colored glass and assume, oh, he's poor or he's not. I mean, you could see why they would be angry. It's almost as if the reason, at first, what did they do? They covered the face so that they shouldn't see the black face. But wouldn't you then, I mean, what did you accomplish really? Meaning, if the whole concern was that we don't want people to see the black face, so they covered it, you haven't accomplished anything by just covering theirs. Like, it seems strange why they would make a two-step jump. Like, once you're covering, just cover everyone's. All of the other cases, it wasn't like the initial thing that they were doing was in order to be attacking anything. It was just the way things were done.
The initial thing was it wasn't pleasant to look at someone who was so.
No, I get it. I get it. Now I don't want to spend too much time on it because I don't want to take too long. But there's a Gemara, I think it's in Shiur, that talks about that it's kashal shikha for a person to look at the face of a person who's Chaim Kanievsky in a Sefer Zikaron, where he goes through all of the different things that are kashal shikha. He doesn't understand how the meaning over here. They try to explain it to Magen Avraham. They're different mahalchim to try to explain exactly why it was okay. And
they didn't know that.
Yeah, and they bring. I heard a story about Shlomo Zalman. What's the kashal shikha? In that Sefer, Chaim Kanievsky talks about you shouldn't eat olives. Olives, right? It says olives are kashal shikha, but he brings a heter that maybe it could be if you eat the olives along with olive oil. Olive oil is, you remember, so he says, it could be they cancel each other out. He says the minhag not to do it because you don't know if oil makes you remember less than what olives make you forget. Shlomo Zalman you wrote a letter to him. He said, you've ruined my breakfast. He says that for years I've been only eating olives and olive oil with the heter, assuming that olive oil knocks out the olives. So I could, and he says, and I stopped. But he says, as I got older, he says, I was fewer and fewer foods that I was allowed to eat. So he wrote a letter to Chaim Kanievsky to say, please don't take it as an insult, but I started eating my olives again because I pushed on everything else to eat. Just I find it
life is a trade-off.
I said it all the time. Every chumrah and kula. Yeah.
They're healthy food.
His son-in-law, right? Chaim's son-in-law.
No. You're talking about Yasha.
Yes, son-in-law.
Yeah, but the story was the Shlomo Zalman. So, just one other quick thing about an olive. Why is an olive? Why is eating olive oil helps remember, whereas the olive itself is cut? I mean, it's very ironic that one. So I heard once that the reason is because Klal Yisrael is nimshal to Azayas, right? The only value of Azayas is squeezing, you fetch it to get the oil out. Either way, okay. Tarabon, not Tarabon. B'Rishayna how you might see an ashirim b'dargish. They used to take them out in these fancy beds, flipping over v'aniyim beklicha in a plain type of regular normal situation, just a regular normal mitzvah. V'hayu aniyim is baishin. So hiskinu shihu akol mitzian beklicha mipnei koyin shel aniyim. The Rishayna how you menichem es hamukmer tachas choyli me'ayim eis. Once someone died from an intestinal problem, so therefore there's obviously going to be an aroma that's not going to be pleasant. So what they would do is they would use some sort of an incense to make it to cover the smell. The people who had that disease, who knew they were going to have that when they died, were embarrassed that was going to be the case. Therefore, everyone got it under the body. So therefore, when you had a woman who died as a nida and all of her clothing needed to be put into the mikvah, and all of them who were in nida, who were nervous that they were going to die, I guess while they were in nida, were scared or embarrassed, and therefore his skinu shiu matbilin al gabe kol hanoshim ibnei kvodin shel nidas chayas. B'rishayna, same thing by Azava. B'rishayna matbilin al gabe zavin. Here it's referring to women because there's it's I guess maybe men too, but the hayu zav and chayim is baishim, and the ones who were alive who were zav were nervous that they were going to have that same treatment.
If it was women, it would say
Rav Zavos, right? Hiskinu shihu matbilin al gav hakol, and therefore they did it mipnei kvodin shel zav and chayim. Rishon hayu. In the beginning, the costs for burial were expensive. Apparently, that hasn't changed, at least in the Goyish Welt, although in the Yiddish Welt is no different. So much so that it was even harder for them to deal with than the actual loss of the body. To the point where people started just leaving the body now to deal with the cost of dealing with the mace. Rabbi Gamliel came along, but he on his own decided in his tzava, let's say that he's not going to be buried with all the fanfare. He says, bury me in a regular, normal flax tachrich, nothing fancy, nothing, no big fancy coffin, nothing like that. And everyone went ahead along with that as well to do that. To even use even less than that, like a hemp cloth, which is not even worth a zuz or only worth a. That's the minhag. We said in the Mishnah, the Brisa, that on Chol HaMoed, in order to create a scenario where there are not too many eulogies, we would put the bed, we wouldn't put it out in the street. That although normally we don't try to have too much hesped on Chol HaMoed for a Talmud Chacham, that's not true. There's a big maramakam for Chol HaMoed being more chashuv than Chanukah Purim. But this is only true if the Talmud Chacham is there. If it's not in front of him, then enechanami, we're mechabed yontif properly, and we don't do hesped. Now, the question is, shaloi b'fan of loy, is it also in Chanukah and Purim? That's not obvious, not clear. Either way, ask the Gemara, is that true? Eini v'ha Rav Kahana saptel Rav Zvid ben Naharda. Rav Kahana said a hesped on Chol HaMoed for Rav Zvid, and Rav Zvid was from Naharda, and Rav Kahana lived before Nahara. He lived in Fum Nahara. He was in a different city. No, Yom Shmuel Havis, it was the day he heard about the death. Okay, fun of Dami, it's like he was there. Amar Ula, hesped alev. The word hesped is to be, Ula is basically giving us a dictionary over here. The word hesped, although normally it means a eulogy, here it means clapping on your heart, like the way by like Yom Kippur, alev t'chsiv al shadayim, on your breast. Sofdim, are you striking on your breast? Tipuach, what does tipuach mean? These are all different words that might show up in different psukim or different chazals or different members or different tanoim. Tipuach means biyad. It means clapping, and kilos is beregel, stamping on the floor. Tanur Rabbanan hamekales, the brisa here. What do you know? How do you know what it means? It means beregel, right? It means if you stomp on the ground, lo yikalos besandal, don't use a sandal. Ela b'minal, use a regular shoe. Mipnei asakana. This is the shaila in the girsa here, whether a sandal is the one that you should use or a regular shoe. It all depends on what sakana it is. Either it's sandal, and the problem with the sandal is that the bottom of a sandal is made very thin and nails can puncture through. The other one says that maybe it's a shoe's a problem because they would wrap up your leg, and therefore if you'd step incorrectly, you could literally like break your ankle or something like that. Regardless of the girsa here, it just means just be careful. When you're sitting with an avel and he nods his head. So here there's also a discussion we've shown him. Does the nodding mean he's letting them know I'm finished? You've consoled me appropriately and get out of here? Or does it mean that he's falling asleep? Maybe it's time to leave. Different mahalchim over here. The bottom line is that you got it. No, that's what this halacha is coming to teach.
That's why now they announce times. They used to nod, but now
I remember this.
They put times on the door.
He just wouldn't leave.
Yeah.
I was like, I wish I would have had this. I would have nodded. I would have like.
Well, that's what you should do. Just Yeah.
Well, maybe you could hint.
You can also just get him to go to the bathroom.
Oh.
Just get him to go to the bathroom.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but yeah.
No one's going to wait for you.
Huh?
No one's going to wait for you. All you got to do is just get up and say, I'm going to be a while. Sorry. stomach.
Oh,
Mashanim ibn Shalom.
I should never have to.
We should never have to hear from it again. Yeah.
Never again.
Aval kivin shedei rosho shuv ein menachmen rishoyin leishav etzlei. Not just simply they should get out. Get out. It's also to sit there. You're being mitzayer the aval. Everyone has a chiyuv to stand up in front of a nasi. Chutz mi aval v'chayla, except in a chayla, meaning because it's not considered a chshivas to make an aval stand. It's not a chshivas for the nasi to watch a sick person have to go, torture himself to stand up in front of him. Anyone, everyone else in that same scenario needs to be told to sit. When you're standing up for the nasi, it's not just one of these jobs. You got to stand, and when you got to be told, okay, it's time to sit. Chutz mi aval v'chola, that if the aval and the chola optionally decided to actually stand, they don't need to be told to sit. They can sit whenever they want. Like we said before, that the din suda savara is to be done only from other people's food. Here's the drasha: the lechem anoshim le'soichel. You shall not eat the food of other people. From here, you see that from everyone else. I mentioned to you before the lashon of the Yerushalmi that a person should always be the neighbor that gives, not the neighbor that requires the aval to do the work. Rabbi Rav Yosef, mechalfi sudasayu lahadadi. They were both in aval at the time, and therefore, in order to sort of take care of this, in order to not have to lose any money, they would basically each one send the Suda Savara to the other one in order to be mekayim this din of Suda Savara without having to waste any money. Let's say someone dies in the city. This is obviously before the times you had of a Chevra Kadisha, so obviously a mace in the city. The city's job is to make sure there's no mason sitting in the city. You got to get them into the ground. Therefore, everyone's usher to do malacha until the base is in the ground. Rav Hamnuna ikla Huna went to Drupta, Shama kol shipur de shechva, and he heard them blowing shofar, which was announcing that someone had passed. Chaza hanach inshi de ka'avdi avidita, and yet he saw other people doing malacha while right after the shofar was blowing. Meaning, it's like, to me, it's like when they have the sound in Eretz Yisrael for like, and all of a sudden, all the cars stop and everyone does. If you see someone who doesn't stop, you're looking at him like, what are you doing? Just, have some respect. He put these people in nido in chayrim for doing the malacha while this person was waiting, unsure about whether the body had been buried yet. Gemara says, "Lo shachva." Is there not a dead person in the city? How can you be doing work? Amruleh, they said to him, no. Chavurta ika b'masa. There's a chevra kadisha. Don't worry about it. We have it set up that whenever someone dies, there's a chevra of guys who take care of it.
Do they have this even back then?
I think their chevra kadisha a little bit different. They had like different chaburas. Like you'd have Group A would handle anyone from Group A, Group B would handle anyone from Group B, but
the tailors, the cobblers,
right? Everyone would sort of like the union workers would part of one of the perks of being part of the union was when you died they would bury you, take care of you. So he said back to them, either I'm taking you out of nidui, or okay, then you're allowed to do work regardless. And that, by the way, that's halacha nowadays. The reason the meaning nowadays is to not be concerned for it. Although there's a discussion. If it's a chashav, an adam chashav, an adam gadol, chacham, a rav of a community, then even if there's a chevra kadisha dealing with the body, that there's an inyan of at least until the levaya, until the levaya actually happens, to take a moment to stop working. I mean, there is an inyan. I'm not exactly sure how Allah it is. I think they say if you happen to be in the area where an adam chashav is being driven or being taken, the stores along that path should try to be closed. Again, it's hard to know exactly how much halacha l'maisa this is, but things are more. Rav Yehuda Amarav kol hamiskasha al meisa yosim midai. This is a Pelagic Gemara. A person who mourns too aggressively. Miskasha al meisa yosim midai. A person who is too bestricken with pain over the avelis. All right, al meis. Sorry, I lost the spot. Hamiskasha al meisa yosim midai al meis achar hu bocha. Did I read that wrong?
I think it's good.
Yeah. Basically, what it's saying over here is if a person is too aggressive in his avelis, he's going to end up having to be an avel again.
Wow.
Meaning he's going to lose someone else.
Meaning he's not accepting what Hashem said. He's not saying this person went to the Olam HaEmes but vanished. He's not accepting any of our Masorah.
Different Rishonim speak out different ideas. I mean, it's all Emunah related. The idea is, do you believe HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the Welt or not? If you believe he runs the Welt, then okay. Makes sense to be said over the loss, but the way I heard it said over is that if a person's sending his son away on a business trip, and it's going to be a very long trip. It's sad to see him go, but he's coming back. And it's not the end of the day. The game's not over. It's halftime. Like, relax. You're going to see him at the end of the game, right? So yes, you have to be ba'avel, but there's a certain point where it's like
dysfunctional.
Exactly.
I don't like the big criers up there. There's some people like, oh, they start crying.
You and the Gemara both.
Like,
He hid so. Listen to this woman.
my brother was like a little girl. He's crying. I don't cry publicly.
Well, he's supposed to cry a little bit.
I don't cry.
Maybe not publicly, but
No.
the Gemara does say, I think somewhere, that it's either Gemara, Chazal, somewhere, that if a person doesn't cry at all, there's other problems. But I mean,
I cried to my wife privately. In
Okay.
public, I didn't cry in the funeral of my father and my mother. No. My brother was like a little girl crying.
I would cry like a little girl.
The scary part is the people who turn on the
cried on my
cry,
wife.
turn on
Yeah,
the
that's a
crying
different
like
story.
a knob.
That's
They're totally calm and they go up and start. Some chazanim do it also.
Yeah, I don't want to say where because we're recording, but I was in a yeshiva once where the joke was always like the chazan on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, whatever it was, like you open up the machzor and it said like in parentheses, cry here.
When I had tears? Man, whatever. So I was on Shabbos when and I was during Kedusha, right? The first one Esrei here, and maybe it was Musa, and then I had tears. I remember. You're not supposed to cry on Shabbos.
No.
Maybe there's a thing there.
No, but you take those tears, you turn them to Hashem, and you say, Hashem, take these tears, and they're tears of love. You're inspired from the moment, and you redirect them in the right way. Yeah.
I wasn't sobbing, granted.
No, because you're not a little girl. But yeah, I understand. There was a certain woman, the Havah b'shvevusa de Rav Huna, that lived in the neighborhood of Rav Huna. Havala shiva b'ni. She had 7 children. Meis chad minayu, and one of them died. Havias kabachya b'yiserta alei, and she was losing her absolute blessed mind over the loss of her son. Shalach Rav Huna loy ta'avdi achi. So much so that it got to Rav Huna, and Rav Huna sent her a letter.
Which is not good for the other children. There's 6 more children that need leadership.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Loy eshguchabei, and he, although he sent this to her, she couldn't console herself. Shalach la, he sent back to her, eat saisis mutav. If you stop, if you listen to me and you do what I told you to stop doing, it good for you. However, if you eat low, if you don't, if you continue doing this, tzevis zivadita, you should start preparing your tachrichin li'idich mis for other death. Umisukul, and eventually, since she couldn't control it, all her children died. And lasof, in the end, Amr la, he said to her, Timush zavidit tachlin afsheich, you should start preparing one for yourself, meaning if you're going to continue to be ba'avelus over these children. Now again, it's pretty impressive considering that now she's just lost 7 kids. At a certain point, you sort of say, you know what, I sort of understand. But even then, there is a point where a person has to acknowledge that mourning too intensely is a chesar and betachan. It's hard for us to speak about, but obviously, there's a level where a person has to acknowledge Hashem runs the world, and this is what Hashem's hashgacha has.
Depression builds on itself, and it eats you up and kills you people in your midst.
The Reb Yochanan, we don't hear, at least I haven't heard about his mourning, but he buried 10 sons.
Yeah. To go around with the tooth.
With the tooth, unbelievable.
So either way, that's what happened. Umi said she died. Either way, the pasuk says, "Al tifku lemeis, al tanudulo." You shall not cry for the mace, and you shouldn't tanudulo. You shouldn't also mourn for him too much. Al tifku lemeis yosmi means don't mourn for him too much. Al tanudulo yosmi kashir. Don't go for too long. Okay, so what does each one of these things mean? Shlosha yomim lebechi. 3 days is for bechi. V'shiva lehesped. This was like the only way we ever knew this growing up was by Avram Avinu, whenever they would say over the vart of exactly how many days after Sari Menu died. But either way, 3 days of Bechi, V'shiva lehesped, Ushloshim legiyot letzasperis. We know you're not allowed to clean and cut your hair during Shloshim. Mikan ve'elech, from that point and on, meaning from Shloshim and on, all the way up until Yud Beis Chodesh, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't be firmer than me. Meaning, if I tell you this is what you're supposed to do, don't do it worse. Wow. And this is why by Yaakov Avinu, about Yosef, knowing the fact that he felt the feelings of Avelus, he knew that Yosef really at the end of the day wasn't gone. Bechu b'choy lahoylech. All right, the pasuk says, same pasuk we were just talking about before in Yirmiyahu, It says, I'll just read the pasuk outside. Al tifku lemeis ve'al tanudu loy. You should not availus over him as much. B'chu b'choy lahoylech, you shall cry, or you shall surely cry for he who leaves. Ki lo yashuv od, he will not come back. Ve'ro es eretz moladato, and he will see the land that he was born in. So let's see what this means. B'chu b'choy lahoylech, amar of Yehuda lahoylech b'lei banim. What this is referring to is someone you shall surely cry for someone who has no children. And it means laholech, he who leaves, meaning he leaves the world, and he's truly left the world, meaning he doesn't even have children left in the world. Rabbi Shua ben Levi, lo azal lebei avla, he wouldn't go to a house of mourning. Ela leman da azal b'leibani, only for those people who would be left without any children. T'chsiv, like it says in this pasuk, like we just said, b'choy lahoylech, ki lo yashuv oid v'ra es eretz meladata. He understood it to mean v'ra es eretz meladata, yeah, but not. He would go to a house of mourning or a scenario where the person died without children. Rav Huna Omar Zesha over Aveira Vishana, but he argues that no, the pasuk when it says Kilo Yashuv Od does not mean that he's never coming back, meaning that he has no kids. Rather, Kilo Yashuv Od means that he didn't do tshuva, meaning to say it's a person who doesn't have Aveira, and once a person doesn't have Aveira, he does it a second time. That's what it's referring to over here, that person is never coming back. Meaning what? Meaning what? But once a person doesn't have Aveira and then he does it again and again, Hutraloi, it becomes to him like it's mutter. Ask the Gemara, Hutraloi, are you telling that it's now mutter for him to do it? Gemara says no. Ela ema nasis like This famous thing we say that once a person does too many Aveiras, let's say a person becomes rugged and doing an Aveira, at that point, that counter pressure that we all, as a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us to not do Aveiras, goes away. And all of a sudden, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be mitzdaref machshav or alamaisa. He starts to. The Rabbi Yoda speaks down in Shar Tshuva. He talks about how a person who does tshuva, what a person's really doing when he does tshuva is he's reconnecting that sensitivity towards chet. And once a person does too much aveira, he breaks down that barrier that exists within him of doing anything against Ratzon Hashem. Right now, if I would say to you, turn the light on, you would start sweating. Like if I put a gun to your head and said, turn the light on Shabbos, okay, you would know the halacha is supposed to do it, but if I said to you, just turn the light on, you would start sweating. But if we started walking into your house and you turned the light on in the morning, Shabbos morning, and you did it for a couple of weeks in a row, eventually it wouldn't feel like anything anymore. That's what it's saying. If it's not like a heter, that psychologically you become, that's not even an aveir anymore. Amr Reb Levi, Avl Shlosha Yomim Arishon, the first 3 days of Aveilus, Yira Es Atzma Ki'ilu Charav Menechas Le Ben Shtei, the different cases here, Kseifa B'Yirei. A person's supposed to feel during those first 3 days an intense level. Again, not to the point where person should become like this crazy woman who, never close with children, but a person should feel like the knife is facing him. There should be a sense of impending doom type of feeling, but not to the point where a person becomes depressed. The Shlosha Ad Shiva, from the 3rd to the 7th day, it lightens up a bit. Then it's Ki'ilu Menachas Le Connected B'Karen Zav. It's in the house, in the corner, but it's not right in front of you, meaning you should feel it, but it should be slightly less. From that point on, meaning up until Yud Beis Chodesh, it's like it's following you around wherever you go. Again, for a father and a mother, Yud Beis Chodesh for a regular Avel to Shloshim. But once it goes past Shloshim for a regular Avel, once it goes past Yud Beis Chodesh, you shouldn't be feeling the knife anywhere. And that's the daf. We'll pick up from here, Mitzvah Shem, tomorrow with the last daf, really, in the Masechta.
Beautiful.
Awesome, very excited.
There was a kid that was crying.